Two Guys, One Shaker Cup podcast, hosted by Joshua Shaw and Ryan Buckeye.
What it do, everybody? Welcome back inside the Two Guys, One Shaker Cup podcast. Josh Shaw, Ryan Buckeye, with an interesting topic today. And I'm surprised we haven't really covered this topic in the past, given some of the people that we're friends with inside this industry. But more or less, I don't think this topic is bigger than just sports nutrition. It's as a business in general. And you guys saw the title. That's why you clicked on it. But as a business, should your business take sides or partake in whether it be politics or social movements? And I think this topic is super relevant now with me being here in Minneapolis. And when this podcast is published, there's obviously a lot of Minneapolis is in the news right now for something tragic that happened, but then the aftermath of this tragic incident and whether or not a company should use their platform to shed light on stuff. And I think it is an interesting topic because I was asked by somebody close to us to use my platform to step up and say something. And I'll just start the podcast by saying I elected not to. And I think it, and we're going to talk in depth of this, I don't think a Fitness Informant or Fit Butters has not necessarily the right, but it's not content that I want to put on those channels. And it's a business to me. And if I'm going to put out content surrounding business, it has to partake to the fitness and nutrition world. So an example, Josh, that was given to me is like, well, you covered the death of Luke Sandow and John Meadows' heart attack. Well, yeah, because Luke Sandow is a figure in bodybuilding and John Meadows is a legend within fitness. But something like the George Floyd situation in Minneapolis has nothing to do with fitness. And I guess that really does kind of draw a question. I mean, do businesses have a social responsibility to their customers who shop their stores, who buy their products, to discuss these topics on their social platforms and then, out in the public eye?
Yeah, there's something on Twitter yesterday, actually, what you're just kind of talking about kind of really struck a chord with me. There's two, what I would consider, thought leaders in retail that I follow. One that's more on the e-commerce side, the other one that's on kind of the traditional retail side. But the guy that was on the traditional retail side, he covered some things around the Target looting. Mm-hmm. And the other guy attacked him and said, how are you going to highlight one thing but not make any commentary on the event in which it happened? And his response was, my content is around retail. This is a retail thing. I don't speak about the other social issue because I don't have a place. I don't come from an expert place, but I do from, what is this happening to the Target or the AutoZone or whatever. And that's the kind of was an argument because one of the guys said you can't talk about one thing unless you talk about the other thing. And that's kind of going to your point around like, where is the line? Like where do you decide where to talk and where not to kind of add your noise or your opinion to? And it's kind of tough, but it's also a very big trending topic. Like when we were going in business school, the terminology was like corporate social responsibility. Right. That's the terminology on it. But now it's morphed into this idea of like woke marketing, this idea that you have to take a stance in social issues. You must kind of decide which side of the fence you're on, and your brand should speak like a person and it should have a stance on this. I don't necessarily agree with that in most cases. I think you definitely there's times when it works extremely well. There's times when it makes a ton of sense, but then there's other times where it just becomes tone deaf and it just looks bad. It looks like you're trying to steal the spotlight of something else. So it's tough. You really need to, like, if anybody's going to dip their toes into, like, if they're a business and they're going to tip their toes as being an activist type of a brand, you really need to know what you're doing before you step into that ring, or it could turn real bad for you.
Even if you say something with all good intentions, someone's going to find a reason to tear it apart. And, it's interesting you brought up Target, and for those, if you're living under a rock and you have no clue what's going on, like, you use the term looting. I use the term, like, robbery. I mean, straight up going in there and stealing stuff from these stores. But Target is a local business to Minneapolis. I mean, Target HQ is right here in Minneapolis. Yeah. They are the ones being, as Josh said, looted by the protesters and by people that are being actively involved in this movement, which, don't get me wrong, living here, it is a movement. It is crazy times right now. People are literally, this is crazy. Like, a lot of people have their conceal and carry up here, but they generally never carry a gun with them, and they might have it with them in the glove box in the car. I mean, you're seeing people walk around with the guns around their waists. I mean, that's how scared people are, and that's not necessarily a good thing at all. But like a company like Target, who's here, and I have not checked Target's Twitter. You might have. I have not looked in to see if they've taken a stance or discussed. I know they closed 20 stores down, and they made a statement on that. But the topic at hand, the issue at hand in which caused these things to happen, I don't know. I should look it up as we're talking. Like, I don't think they spoke on it. I mean, they may have said, like, you know, the sad circumstances or whatever, but they hadn't taken a stance, at least as of this recording. And I don't necessarily think they need to. I mean, I don't know if I would if I was Target. Target's much too big of a corporation that, you know, that statement would have to come from the top down, from the C-suite down. And, you know, if I was Target and I was going to release a statement and I'm the CEO of Target, I'm the one actually physically typing it on the keyboard and hitting send on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, companies like retailers that service so many different types of people, it's very tough for them to, you know, take such a strong side. Now, it's one thing to, you know, make a statement around just the act in which it happened, and obviously that's just a humanity type of thing. Correct. You know, you make a pretty cookie cutter type of response like that, and you know, you make sure that people know, hey, we don't stand for that. But you try at that point, it's hard then to try to make a line in the sand, because you do have customers on both sides of the fence that you service. And, you know, I think Walmart or any of these types of companies, like, it's very hard for them to take a hard line. And it's back to your point, it's hard for them to really feel like their voice is something that matters. I think a lot of times, like, I think a lot, just because somebody has like an opinion doesn't mean that they are an expert. You know what I mean? Just because somebody has a soapbox doesn't mean that their voice should be heard any more than anybody else's. Sometimes silence, and sometimes just, like, you know, not necessarily getting involved and adding extra noise is the appropriate move. Sometimes it's just a matter of what that organization believes in, the core values of that organization, the ownership, and obviously the smaller the company, the more less ambitious or more fragmented the market that they're going after, the easier it is for them to make those hardline decisions. But I think it's one of those things where it's like a case by case basis, where you have to really decide if it makes sense to add this into your business, because anytime you do that, forever it changes your business. And then at that point, you have a different path that you need to uphold. Point in case, like a Nike. Yeah. Nike took a lot of flack for the Colin Kaepernick thing, which is kind of interwoven to what we're talking about here. And Nike took the stance of supporting Colin Kaepernick, right, which, you know, aligns with a lot of what they've done. It also aligns very well with their customers, yes, and what their customers' beliefs are. You know, there's the famous quote of Michael Jordan's always, you know, like that Republicans buy sneakers as well. That was his stance, because he was like, I don't want to be involved with this. But in Nike's case, yeah, Republicans buy Nikes as well, but they don't really buy the $200 newest drops. You know, they're probably buying the Kohl's $50 specials. Yeah. And like for them, it's better for them to go towards the other side of the fence, because that's their core customer. That's who they speak to. They speak to more of the progressive consumer base, not the ultra conservative one that is upset if somebody's kneeling at a football game. It's like, boo-hoo. You know what I mean? So I think that Nike has that a brand that they've been for decades, that they've always taken social stances. But there's other companies that if they did that, they would look, you know, fake, or they'd look like, what's the term? Like, it's a woke washing. It's like this idea that you're just trying to like steal whatever social issues attention just because you feel like you should, over you actually have some value to give. I mean, you should have some value to give if you're going to talk. If not, just let other people do it. Let other people that are stronger attached to it, let them support them. Don't necessarily just try to get involved with something that it doesn't make sense. This has been something like the last couple of years, there's been a ton of these different things. And I know it's kind of maybe flip it for a second, but another case around like mental health has been a big one. And I know like Burger King and a couple other ones like tried to go out. I think it was maybe Sunny Delight. So we're talking mostly like consumer packaged goods or consumer brands, because that's where you and I think are most best at this. And like Little Debbie snacks, there's like a couple of them that like they made these like big overarching things around mental health, but it's like, why are you even talking about that stuff? Yeah. Like, what's that? Like, what's your place into that? Like, does that even make all that much sense? And it gets kind of into the talk we were having last podcast around like just the idea of cause marketing or whatever. Like, it's easy just to kind of like throw a dart against the wall and have a bunch of causes on there and just pick one of them that fits whatever for like the flavor of the week. But like, do you actually have any like skin in the game there? Do you actually feel big and you want to have a storyline that's like a part of it because it's something core to you? That's kind of the difference in which this kind of scenario comes for me. Like, should a brand or shouldn't a brand talk? Does it speak to you like viscerally or not?
Right. I love the Nike campaign that you brought up again, and we've talked about that before. Actually, one of the first podcasts we did, I believe we actually discussed the campaign, and that for Nike, it's going to sound weird for you guys listening and girls listening, but it was a perfect storm for them. Like, it was a perfect situation because Kaepernick was an athlete. Nike obviously is involved in athletics. Nike obviously knows who their customer is. They also engage in social listening, so they have tons of software saying, well, what's our target audience talking about on social media? And overwhelmingly, the millennials were siding with what Kaepernick was doing. You know, you had your select few individuals that was totally against the kneeling for the flag, but the vast majority of millennials were for what he was doing. So don't think Target went into that with a gut instinct. They had data to back up what they were doing. They obviously aren't going to make that big of a decision, knowing what's going to happen. Now, we saw on social media people burning jerseys and sneakers and saying they're not going to buy again. Guaranteed those people went back and bought a pair of Nikes after the fact. But you and I talked about like the bump in sales that Nike actually got from it. It was significant. And I think I made this statement on social, that I thought it was one of the most brilliant campaigns done. Now, can I sit here and tell everybody that I would have made that decision? No, I can't. I mean, that even with the metrics and the data supporting that this is going to go over well, it takes balls to do something like that.
Yeah.
A company that size, because especially on a topic like that, like, listen, no one, I don't think Josh and I on this podcast are going to try to disagree with that racism is real in this country. It's 100% real in this country. It's probably always going to be real in this country, and we're always going to have stuff like this. So for Nike to take a stance, good for them. This time is the most recent events. It's difficult. Again, just because you have a platform does not mean it's meant to be utilized for certain situations like this. And I want to kind of tie it into maybe, the fitness world. So in our industry, we know plenty of people who actually have some pretty good social influence among people because, for instance, like my Fitness Informant brand, a lot of people think it's an extension of just me, and it really is, and that brand has a personality. It kind of is seen as a person. So should I go on there and discuss this? Because, it's a tough decision for me because it's like, it's not fitness related. I do have a voice. I will talk about it with you, but I'm not educated enough on these topics. I'm not the one who's been suppressed and had to deal with these things. Like, I'm not saying I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth because I damn sure was not. But I don't know what these individuals are feeling and what they're doing. So for me to come out and say like what they're doing is like, I mean, I'll say I don't agree with the rioting and the looting. I don't agree with that at all. But like the reason behind it, like I can't ever tell every people that I fully understand it because I never can. So it's just it's interesting because like in our space, right? If you are an African American or female or male in the fitness or nutrition world, and you have social influences, chances are you're going to use your platform to educate and help. If you're a Caucasian, so you say Mark Lobeyer, we use him a lot, but he's a friend of ours. He's got some pretty good social influence. He's got a good following, and he's also traditionally been very outspoken and vocal about political and topics of this nature. I don't know. Have you seen? Has he posted anything on this topic yet?
I mean, he usually keeps it to Twitter, but he's been pretty active on it. But I don't necessarily think he's on Twitter. He's more acting as himself over as a brand, but obviously it's an extension of the brand. It's similar to, athletes, influencers, whatever. They're all extensions 100%. of a business. But, I don't necessarily think that he is taking, a galvanizing approach to it. I think he's kind of similar to you and I in the sense that, like, do we necessarily condone the actions on either side? No. I think that for the looting and all that kind of stuff, like can I understand how it could get to that point? Definitely. Like I definitely can. I don't necessarily think that I can condone it, but I definitely think that if I was a person of color and I was living in Minneapolis, I'm not sure that I wouldn't feel a certain way to do a certain thing. I just don't know if I would. So I can't really say that like I can't take the opposition of that approach. And I think that the other kind of thing I've been trying to wrap my mind around is that if riots don't work, like what do? I think that's like you go back, I think there's been a lot of people pulling back to the civil rights movement and Martin Luther King and a lot of things like that. And I think that that is for somebody like me that's a stoic person that's nonviolent, whatever, like that's how I would like to be engaged if somebody wanted to communicate. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that's the world we're in today. And I think that they whoever is opposed to certain things, I think they go through iterations on how they try to approach things. And we talked about the Colin Kaepernick thing. I mean, that was a nonviolent approach to it. White people didn't like that. It's like where do you go? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I think it's like it gets to a certain point. Like, what is the best way to do it? And that's where I try to wrap my mind around. I try to put myself in that position. I'm like, I don't know what the best way. I guess like I think as a privileged white male in America, I always think like the best way to get over on us is to beat us at our own game. It's like become self-made billionaires, like make us like change the game, do things that like would mess with a bunch of old white people's minds. Yeah. Like that to me, I think is more like would be a much bigger way. But obviously that's like a long vision, you know what I mean? It's not something that's going to help something tomorrow.
Right. And I mean, and even when we speak on this podcast, right, you and I think, are being very well, we collect our thoughts before we're speaking because we don't want to necessarily be perceived as saying the wrong things. I think it's very clear and apparent that Josh and I we understand the reasoning behind what's going on. We just don't condone the actions. But I mean, the biggest thing too is like, okay, if somebody says, well, if you're an extension of your brand, and you're going to talk about it on your personal platform, then why don't you use your professional platform to do so? Like back to Mark, right? Everybody knows Mark is MTS Nutrition and Tiger Fitness. I mean, come on, he's all over it. So like if there's like, Mark, you have X amount of more followers on Tiger Fitness, use that to reach more people. Like he hasn't done it, and I don't ever foresee him doing it. But like me on my personal Facebook, I made a small thing on it. I didn't make a big deal of it. But again, there are fans of the FI brand who follow my personal page too, so they can see it that way. I just it's hard. It is really hard because I'm not tied to that. I don't have any ties to that, and the argument for me was like, well, you're a brand born and bred in Minneapolis, or you're here, so you should. And it's like, I don't need to. I mean, there are plenty of people with a lot more expertise on this, like you mentioned. And the thing is, I'm not well educated on everything that's going on either. I've been so busy with Fit Butters and everything else in life, like to take time to sit down and actually understand like what happened. Like I'll be fully honest, I haven't watched the video. Like I've seen images, but I have not watched the video, nor do I want to watch the video. Like that does not like when somebody says you need to see the video, the answer is no, I don't. I don't need to see something like that. I don't want to see something like that. And again, I didn't have time, but I can understand, from what's being explained to me, watching that video, white, black, indifferent, whatever, like feeling rage and feeling upset, and considering the time had passed while this gentleman, I'm not going to call him a gentleman, this person, excuse me, is still out there free to roam the streets, when a normal person, like if, Josh Shaw does this to somebody, he's in jail that day, 100% in that day. So I can't say I understand because again, I'm not in that position, but I can, what's the word I'm looking for? This is a tough one. Like I guess I could say I understand. Like I understand why someone would be upset. I don't know how they feel per se because I'm not in those shoes, but I can understand why someone would be upset. But again, the subject at hand here is as a business and your corporate social responsibilities, do they extend beyond, reducing pollution and, hiring X amount of people of race? And I mean, on socialist issues like this, I wonder in 2020 if we're going to start to see more brands take a stance, and more brands stand up and say, like, we stand with X, we don't condone this. In this case, I think it still is, like, as a brand, you could come out again and just say, like, we feel bad and this is terrible. That's easy. But to make a statement, like a true statement on it, I don't know. I would think we see more brands today than ever before do it. But again, to your point, right? Like if you're a smaller brand, it's not as much risk. But if you're a brand on that Fortune 500 list, I would love metrics. I would love metrics for somebody to go through the Fortune 500 list and say, okay, how many of these brands on this list engaged in this movement or engaged in this on social? Because that would be super interesting. I wish Forbes or somebody would do that. Just put one of your interns on it and check every single Twitter platform. And because I don't know what that percentage would be, Josh. I really don't.
Yeah.
Like, if you look at the Fortune 500 versus say the Inc. 5000, right? Like they're two different lists. One is like small companies who are growing fast, and one is just like established companies who have a shit ton of money. What's that ratio difference? And I can't even begin to guess what the percentage would be on the Fortune 500 list. I have no clue.
Yeah. I to your point, I think it's increasing in its usage in terms of, this idea of whatever you want to consider woke marketing or whatever. But basically, it's this idea that everybody's trying to get attention. Like that's the biggest issue here. That's the most important, most valuable thing in the world is now attention. And in a world where everybody's battling for everybody's attention, it becomes like harder and harder for you to earn it, even doing like normal things. So like people end up naturally polarizing themselves. Our news networks are like the way for you to make money is not to be a centralist in the middle. It doesn't make sense. You have to take one side or the other, like for media, for personalities, for whatever. Like that's the only way you stand out in such a noisy space today. Yeah. So brands naturally are starting to like take those decisions because people are like, you think about it, like Trump, hate Trump. It's 50-50. This, like, you know what I mean? Every time at this world is like almost split evenly. So like whatever you say, somebody's going to hate it. And you have to be okay with that. And it's this point of like, if you're going to naturally fragment yourself, you might as well go all in on a one type of a kind of like customer base. And it goes back to like knowing, do you actually know your customer? I'll kind of give you some real world examples. I won't tell you the names, but like during this time of COVID-19, I specifically have had 3 conversations with brands. We've talked about them a lot on this show around the perception in which they're giving to their customer bases through the way they're operating their business during COVID-19, being, are they following social distancing? Are they following certain procedures? Because tends to be on the more liberal side of customers, the younger, more liberal side of customers are more, focused on the public health side of that. And so if you're not following that, and a lot of the brands that we talk really highly of, they're very much transparent. They're showing behind the scenes. They're showing the owners, the what. So like all that is available for somebody to be able to look at those things. So if you are a brand on that side of the fence and you're not following the appropriate CDC guidelines and you're not doing all these things, your customers are going to look at you like, who are you? What are you doing? And then on the opposite side, if you are somebody that's speaking to the more conservative Republican side, that's your customer base or whatever, you tend to just go on as life as normal because that's what they want you to see. They want you to see that you're like, you're not bothered by this. You're not whatever. And it's honestly, you have to know what is your demographics of your customers. Where is the majority of your customers going to sit? Because during that time, if you act inappropriate to where the majority of your customers are, you're going to lose a lot of your customers. Just not even without like saying it publicly. They're just going to notice it and they're going to go, wait a minute. This brand is not for me. This is not who I want to support. This is not. And I've had those conversations with the teams and said, like, you have to be really thoughtful in the way that you're putting yourself out there. You have to be authentic to whatever you're doing, but you also have to understand, like, how does that align with your customers? Because if it doesn't align, you should probably just maybe go a little bit darker than you normally do. It's unfortunate you have to say those things, but people are watching during this time. And you have to take account of that. If not, it's going to end up biting you in the butt.
Right. For me, like my stance taking came on caffeine dosages, right? Like I took a stance on a topic within our world that is polarizing within our world. That I don't know if you'd say it got me notoriety, but people agree with me on it. That was like a polarizing topic within our world. But again, that is not even at the level of extreme that what's going on in the world today.
Yeah.
So. You don't talk about this stuff publicly. You and I had a conversation just via text. Like you pretty much talk about it with maybe your close friends and your girlfriend. Would there be a certain topic you think that would entice you to use your social platform to and by social platform, I mean just like your business platform. Like, what would be a topic that would get you to get up and use that platform to try to influence or, guide people in a way that on a social topic?
I don't know. I mean, I think that the closest thing that we can relate this to is probably with what we just, I guess we're still technically going through with COVID-19. Like, I made a few posts pretty early on, like we're talking, early March at this point, basically telling people that they were seeing the picture the wrong way. And I took a stance because I was saying, look for these things happening with the economy, do it like trying to be as I guess, non-political, not trying to like show any of my biases, just kind of give the facts as much as I could to try to let people know an underrepresented, I guess, opinion on what was going to happen in the next couple of months, just because everybody was focused on the sensationalizing of the body counts and everything. And I was basically saying, yeah, that's great. I mean, like, we don't want to have that. That's terrible. I get it. But there's something bigger and scarier behind this that you need to be paying attention to as well, and make sure you don't lose sight of this. I tended to be a little bit like, you make those kind of posts sometimes where your like heart starts to race a little bit and you're like, ooh, I don't know if I feel very comfortable like making these posts. I had those things a few times, and what ended up happening was I ended up getting like probably more behind the scenes like messages and things than I normally would do. What it didn't do though for me was, like, most people, I think then that would make them want more of it. Like, they got a taste of something and they want to like press more of it. And I had people asking me like, why am I not pressing and I just said, I mean, like, again, it's not necessarily within my my normal like stuff I'm an expert in. And though I might have very expert like opinions about things because I'm very well read, and I'm very, I guess, I look at both sides of the coin a lot of times. I just don't necessarily like to just put out a bunch of noise because I can. I'd rather pick and choose the things that I'm most passionate about and the ones that I think are going to bring the most value to people. If I don't think it's going to bring a lot of value, I just would rather just like shut it off. And that's probably the most recent one. I've had ones over the years, actually, like even this Colin Kaepernick one. I made a big post about it around how people were just hating on Nike, and I made a post basically outlining why exactly Nike did what they did and why they're going to continue to do these things. And a lot of people were like, man, I didn't even look at it that way. And it's like, I took a stand, but it's also like sometimes you just have, if I have a different way of looking at it, I try to add my opinion if I think it's going to add value. But if not, I try to just stay out of it, because I don't want to be taken and looked at, I guess, the wrong way. And like, I might write 1,000 words and 10 of them are wrong, or we might say something through this 30 minutes, like a minute of it sounds bad and all of a sudden people hate us. It's like, that kind of stuff is a little bit scary, I think, sometimes, just because people do cherry pick. I know as content creator, I know you as a content creator, like, people cherry pick things from our content. It's like they'll take one line out of our whole video and they'll be like, oh, this guy, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's like, come on, man. And that's the scary part. And that's why a lot of people don't create content. A lot of people don't do these things, because it comes to the point where it eventually gets turned around on you, and you have to be able to be thick-skinned enough to like defend yourself, or at least let people know what you actually, discuss it in a way that actually lets people know what's going on.
That's a big thing you said there. Thick skin. I mean, that doesn't
exist
much
skin,
anymore.
thick skin.
So, no, I think I'd be interesting to hear other business owners, chime in on this, because I mean, in our space, it's a little different because
I've seen a few make some comments.
But I'm saying I think more are going to make comments in our space because they just don't give a fuck. Like they don't think the way a brand does that maybe has a board and shareholders, to report to, right? Like a Target has shareholders and a board. An Optum Health here in Minneapolis, they same thing. United Healthcare. If it's just like a two-man shop, they're getting on their soapbox and they don't, give a shit type of thing, right? So I don't, there's not a lot of brands in our space that have that. You could look towards like a Cellucor or something, which maybe they're a little bit bigger. I don't foresee, Optum Nutrition,
like Glambia saying,
Glambia saying anything like that. So, size, I think, does matter because the bigger you get, the more you kind of are like, gun shy. But when sometimes you take risks as a small brand. You think like, hey, if I say this, maybe I'll get X amount of customers out of it. Because there's always, I think, there are people who make statements and comments and take a stance because that's what they truly believe in. And then you have those brands that make a statement or comment or take a stance because they're trying to leverage that into something. And I think when you do that, you do the latter, consumers can see that you're being, authentic on it sometimes, or I think, fake. And I think if you're truly passionate about something, you truly you feel it in your gut and you say something via video or Twitter or whatever, that's going to be more impactful without an alternative motive in mind, a la making money. So I would be super interested in hearing what people have to say out there. Big, small, whatever. If you're listening to this podcast, watching this podcast, comment or reach out, because I would love to hear your reasonings for doing it or not doing it, because it's interesting. Everybody has a different perspective on it. And, if you feel that it's your responsibility to stand up and say something, I mean, it'd be interesting to hear why you feel that way and what your stance is, because, I mean, it's a topic that's relevant today for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you guys like what you heard here on the podcast, hit that subscribe button. We're on iTunes, Spotify. You can watch via YouTube. Follow Josh Shaw on his social platforms at J Shaw Consultant. We are Two Guys, One Shaker Cup, Facebook, Instagram, all over the place, all over the webs. And we appreciate you guys tuning in. Again, like I said, engage with us on this topic, whether you're a business owner or not, and let us know future topics you want to talk about, because I mean, who knows what the future's going to look like next week? I mean, one week it's we stay home, we can't go anywhere, stay outside of 6 feet of people. The next week is you got thousands of people hand in hand downtown Minneapolis, not giving a shit about COVID. But so this is a crazy fucking world we live in, Josh. Just a crazy world.